You are listening to the continuation of the story. You can listen to the previous part via the link in the description below this video. Happy listening. Black. I wiped my mouth with a paper towel to remove any traces of vomit as I stood bent over the sink. The picture of Mr. Worthy popped into my head again. His words rang in my ears. I threw up again. There was no excuse for the humiliation I experienced. Not to mention that I betrayed my family. My husband's wife served another man, mother of my sons. You did it for them. You are ready to do anything for your family. This thought did not make what happened easier and did not make me a heroine. I was devastated at being put in this situation. It hurt me that a man could use another person like that for his pleasure. But most of all, I was consumed by rage. Yes, I was angry with Mr. Worthy. His behavior drove me crazy. But to be honest, most of my anger was directed at my own husband. I felt humiliated and trampled, like a woman of easy virtue who had to go to work to earn money because he, my husband, could not cope with our financial situation. Deep down, I needed a hero, someone I could rely on, and he seemed to have left his protective cloak in the cleaners when he was needed most. I expected support and strength from him, the confidence that he radiated when we were just starting our life together. After all, he was once truly a hero to me. From the very first moment, when he saved me from old fears, surrounded me with care and love, he seemed to me like someone who was always there, who would protect and support. I admired him, was proud of him, and was sure that, no matter what, he would remain the person I could rely on in the most difficult moments. And now I felt more alone than I ever had in all the years of our marriage, as if the hero who had been there at the beginning had simply disappeared, leaving me alone with this storm of life. Besides, our recent fight brought out something in me that I didn't want to remember. When he called me Jasmine, it seemed to me that he had destroyed the wall that I had been building for a long time. I cherished the hope that my past did not exist for him. I thought he saw Kara for who she was, not who she was. Now I knew that even though he didn't talk about it, he still held a bitter feeling about my past. No matter how other men looked at me, he had to see me. When he angrily brought up the topic of my past, the shame of that period of my life came back to the surface where I had buried it. Now I felt more like a woman of easy virtue than ever on stage, writhing and dancing in front of other people's eyes. I washed my face and looked at myself in the mirror one last time. That tear-stained woman of easy virtue who came here 15 minutes ago was no longer looking at me. I grabbed my bag and headed home with the good news: I got my job back. As if it mattered. Tom, later that night, I sat at the table and looked thoughtfully at my wife. She silently picked at the food on her plate with a detached, depressed look. She seemed lost in a world of worries and worries. This morning, she did the bravest thing I've ever seen. She returned to the job she had quit and begged her boss to take her back. I couldn't imagine the humility this required. I respected her for that. She was always a woman who did what she had to do, especially for her family. I loved her for her inner strength and determination. She gave me the strength to get up day after day and look for a job that I wasn't hired for. She was honestly the strongest woman I knew. When her parents kicked her out of the house, she danced in front of strangers to support herself and Dean. With no work experience, she used the only thing she had to put food on the table. But her story didn't end there. How many young girls go this route and get lost in the easy money? She remained on the ground. She studied during the day and worked at night. When she opened up to me and talked about her past, she said that every man who touched her helped feed her and Dean. That's how she dealt with it, night after night. She just kept in mind what she had to do. This girl was the one I fell in love with. When she came to work at the company where I was working at the time, she was exactly the woman who charmed me. Soft, but with a quiet inner strength that could move mountains. However, she had an Achilles heel. Her weakness was anger. The hidden resentment she felt towards men sometimes reared its head at the most inopportune moments. She lost all control and began to behave irrationally. She could say and do things that would later cause her problems, as in the case of her boss. I knew it had something to do with her past, with her time as a dancer. The way men treated her then left her with a natural cynicism and contempt. At times it seemed like she was two different people. There was that gentle and caring Kara who spoke to me lovingly about the future. Her smile was contagious. When you meet her, you immediately become attached to her. She cried at the films. She laughed at all my stupid jokes. She rocked Sam to sleep by singing him lullabies every night during the early years of his life. And there was another side of her that she hid from the world. It was Kara, constantly haunted by her past, Jasmine, an impulsive woman with anger at the ready, constantly feeling like she needs to wield a sword and shield. Almost no one saw this appearance of hers, but as soon as someone angered her, everything got out of control. Of course, I didn't make things any easier when I reminded her of her past. I knew how much it would hurt her, just as much as it hurt me knowing that she didn't value me. After our strangely quiet dinner, the boys ran to their rooms, doing some of the things boys do at that age. This was probably due to pressing buttons on game controllers. Kara and I were alone in the living room, watching Killer Hunter. I decided to try to start a conversation. "I'm glad you were able to get your job back," I said, hoping to start a conversation. She winced slightly, but tried to hide it. "For now, yes, but I don't think I'll be there long," she replied indifferently. I couldn't understand her mood. She looked neither pleased nor disappointed, rather humble, as if this was her destiny and she was just going to accept it. Something else was wrong. It seemed as if she was closing herself off from me. It was as if I was no longer part of her inner world. Whereas before I had been invited into her thoughts, now I was greeted at the door like an intrusive guest. The rest of the evening passed quite calmly. We communicated, talked to each other, but nothing important was said. All attempts to start a conversation with her were unsuccessful. We simply existed next to each other until we went to bed. Lying next to me, I realized that subtle hints of conversation did not work. I needed to start out in the open. "Honey, are you okay? You seem kind of distant." "Why do you think that, Tom?" "Well, you hardly spoke to me. Are you still angry about yesterday?" I noticed how her face reacted to this question. "Well, here is the answer. You mean that time you mentioned my past? Insinuate that I got this job faster than you just because I give out lap dances? Are you asking if I'm mad at you?" The start was not the best. First of all, I thought we were already behind this argument. We both said unnecessary things to each other in a fit of anger, and it was both our fault. "Sorry, Kara, okay? We both said a lot of unnecessary things to each other. I didn't mean what I said. That's just how I reacted when you called me a weakling who couldn't provide for my family. You have no idea how much this hurt me. I'm just tired of the constant arguing." Next to me, I felt her tension ease slightly. "I'm tired of arguing too, Tom, and I'm sorry I said what I said. I shouldn't have talked about you like that." I reached out to hug her, and she snuggled up to me. It was so nice. "You do understand that I'm trying to find a job, right, Kara? You know I don't just sit back." She nodded as if she understood, but it seemed to me that it was more automatic. I wasn't sure she really understood what I was trying to tell her. "You know that, right?" "I know, Tom. It's just hard for me. You see, I was forced to return to this man and humiliate myself in order to get my job back. I. With these words, she burst into tears. All I could do was just hold her and let her cry. At that moment, I felt like the most worthless person in the world. I hated that I couldn't protect her from this humiliation. The only thing that could be worse is if he forced her to perform intimate services for him. After a difficult night, we finally fell asleep. Kara, 2 weeks later. If I thought I could go back to work as if nothing had happened, I was sorely mistaken. Not only because everyone knew that I had returned with a humiliating request for a readmission, but also because I suspected that our conversation with Mr. Worthy had not remained between us. The minions who were constantly hovering around him and praising him began to look askance at me. Their gazes lingered on me longer as I walked past. They became bolder in their words, often using ambiguities and hints. It's a pity I don't have a hard-working secretary like you, with a grin. You must have been very convincing in old man James's office if he gave you a second chance. I wonder what you expressed to make him change his mind, giggle. Naturally, this pompous peacock did nothing to stop the rumors. He just sat there, smiling complacently. He often devoured me with a look full of lust. I tried not to notice all this and focused on work. This continued until the day I dreaded came. I sat at my desk, drafting a memo to send to all employees. It talked about upcoming company meetings related to falling sales that were to take place in the coming months. Several influential people, including the marketing manager, would be present at these meetings. I heard Mr. Worthy call me into his office. I put aside my business and headed towards him. "Did you call me Mr. Worthy?" I asked as professionally as possible. Even then, I realized that I had made a mistake. "Yes, Mrs. Winchester, I really need to talk to you. Please close the door and lock it," he said. I understood what he was driving at, and I had a firm intention not to follow this humiliating path. Everything inside me was shrinking, but I remained calm. I needed to find a way to avoid this situation without being aggressive. "Mr. Worthy, I would prefer to leave the door open," I answered as calmly as possible. He was a little confused. He probably expected a completely different reaction. But this arrogant, impudent man was not going to give up his dessert so easily. "I don't think you'll want the door open, Kara." "Close it," he said with emphasis. Mentally taking a deep breath, I answered just as calmly, "Sir, whatever you want to tell me can be discussed with the door open." I was even proud of myself for keeping my cool. He, on the contrary, began to lose his composure. "Kara, if I didn't know better, I'd think you were trying to avoid being alone with me," he said with a snarky tone. I tried not to resort to sarcasm. I honestly tried. But everyone's patience is not unlimited. "I'm sorry, Mr. Worthy. I didn't think it was disguised." He even grinned. The smile, of course, was still the same smug, but now there was a little humor in it. However, the pleasantries are over. His next move was as rough as a rhinoceros in a glass shop. "I don't think you want everyone to see me having sex with you. Close the damn door," he growled. Although I foresaw that he would do something like this, I was still amazed by his impudence and straightforwardness. It was as if he believed that I owed him something, as if he owned me. I still controlled myself, although the anger inside was growing. "That won't happen, James. Never. I already told you that I am not going to be your woman of easy virtue. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to work," I replied in an icy tone. That's when he used his main weapon. I was already expecting this, so I wasn't surprised when he said, "Well, I think you should start packing your things. Make sure you tell HR where to send your last check." Now I was really furious, but as I already said, I was ready for such a turn. From the day I returned to work, he acted as if nothing had happened, at least in front of me. But by the second week, he began to become impudent. It was only a matter of time before he tried to have his way again. But I was ready for this. You see, I had time to think, to comprehend what happened. I felt helpless. At that moment, I felt like Jasmine, and I hated it. In the weeks that followed, I realized his weakness. He was so self-confident, so convinced of his integrity, that he did not even notice the obvious gaps in his defense. And I was going to show him how vulnerable he was. With difficulty holding back a smile, I replied, "I will do so, sir. I think we'll see you in court when I sue you for wrongful termination and sexual harassment." Seeing how his face changed, I allowed myself to chuckle slightly. But he wasn't ready to give up yet. Collecting himself, he struck back. "Bold statements, Mrs. Winchester. Do you have proof?" His chair creaked as he leaned back, looking at me with hostility. It was a challenge. "No, I have no proof. But do I need them?" His eyes darted from side to side, trying to understand where I was going. I continued. "We both know that any allegation of sexual harassment will be thoroughly investigated. Colleagues will be questioned. Men will certainly support you, but what will women say? What will they say when they are asked about your behavior?" What do you think investigators will find? His confidence began to fade. The calm mask began to crack, giving way to anger. He tried to counter with the following argument. Maybe they'll find out what you did to get your job back, you damn easy woman. He spat in my face. It was painful to hear such a thing, but I tried not to show it and just grinned, as if it were a stupid act of an unintelligent child. Perhaps they will find out. But tell me, James, will this help your cause, or, on the contrary, will it weaken it? When your tear-stained secretary, your subordinate, by the way, sits down in front of them, what kind of story will she tell? Surely a heartbreaking story about a ruthless, heartless boss who took advantage of a desperate woman in need of a job to provide for her family. She came to him on her knees, and he forced her to provide him with intimate services. He looked clearly uncomfortable, and I enjoyed every moment of his humiliation. It seems that he could not have imagined that the scenario would unfold this way. To be honest, I even wondered if he retained his readiness. Well, that kept me busy for a bit. Do you really think that they will believe you? It will be your word against mine. His voice wavered, revealing his uncertainty. I grinned internally. Well, that's not entirely true. With all the rumors going around the office, rumors that you clearly haven't tried to stop, I think there's enough smoke to alert us to a possible fire. Your friends may not outright betray you, but are you sure that they will resist the temptation to tell others the same gossip? Judging by the sidelong glances I've been receiving since returning, it seems to me that almost the entire office heard some version of our conversation. I think the board of directors will show great interest in these rumors. Yes, these details may not be decisive, but altogether they add up to a picture that I can support with the last secretary who worked here. When I talked to her on the phone, she told me this. I whistled emphatically and shook my head, as if hinting at how serious her confessions were. This was my trump card, the last secretary I replaced. Her sudden dismissal still remained a mystery, at least until I talked to my old friend Sandra. You see, Sandra, aka Starlet, knew James very well. He was one of her regular customers. He adored her dancing and even paid for other services. It was thanks to her that I learned about the vacancy. She warned me about him when I was looking for a job. When I realized where all this could go, I asked her for advice. She recommended finding the secretary I replaced and asking her. An hour of telephone conversation with that woman convinced me that I would never kneel before this insignificant man again. She did not want to testify and expose herself to publicity, but simply information about her experience became a powerful argument for me. I was saving this trump card for a case like today. It was clear from his face that I had dealt the decisive blow. And then he completely lost his composure. You damn thing, I wonder what your husband will think when I tell him what you did, he shouted. The more angry he became, the calmer I became. The power was on my side, and we both knew it. There is no better feeling in the world than complete control over the scoundrel who harmed you. Please do it. This will certainly play into my hands in court against you, I answered calmly. This sobered him up. He didn't answer, but I felt ready to continue. He may divorce me, or he may forgive me. Be that as it may, with the money we will recover from you and the company, we will no longer experience financial difficulties. This money will be a good help, even if he wants to break up with me. In any case, I will be provided for. If I get a particularly harsh judge, I might not work anymore. But I slowly approached him, deliberately making each step exaggeratedly graceful. I leaned towards him until our faces were almost close. I saw how he caught the aroma of my perfume and knew that he liked it. But I was more interested in the fear in his eyes. But I think it will be more difficult for you. Your wife will probably leave you when she finds out that you forced me and the previous secretary to serve you. Not to mention your weekly visits to one dancer at Sal's club. As I said this, I saw his face turn pale. He was probably wondering how I knew so much. Well, he doesn't need it. The main thing is that now his life was in my hands. I continued to mock him. You know, James, I think she'll get a good amount of child support. Of course, once you lose your job and pay me compensation for harassment, You won't have much left. How soon can you get another job with such a trail behind you? My voice was soft, almost a whisper, but there was a threat in it. I had him in a vice, and we both knew it. Yes, if the situation had escalated, I might have had to suffer too. I could lose my husband and my job, but he would have faced a much more serious punishment, and he understood this. At that moment, he faced the choice that King Pyrrhus once faced when faced with the Romans, and it was clear from his face that he was not ready to make such sacrifices for such a dubious victory. Despite all this, it seemed to me that this bastard was still excited, perhaps even more than when he called me into his office with indecent intentions. He was so furious and humiliated that he simply opened and closed his mouth as if he was trying to say something, but could not find the right words. It was like he was stuck between wanting me and hating me. It would be funny if it weren't so pathetic. "Well, James," I said in a normal tone, as if we were having the most innocent conversation. "If that's all you need, I'll get back to work. I have a lot to do. My boss can be a real jerk when work isn't completed on time." With these words, I turned around and walked out, closing the door behind me, leaving him alone in the office cursing into space. With a triumphant shake of my head, I returned to my desk and continued working. Later that night, I sat on the couch next to my husband and we watched TV. Although the word watched is too strong here, rather, the TV was simply working in the background. I was playing on my phone and he was looking at something on his laptop. The memory of crushing Mr. Worthy came back to me like crushing his tiny ambitions in my hand. Metaphorically, of course. I wasn't going to physically touch him anymore. I felt like Olivia Pope from Scandal. Smart, strong, invincible. It's better not to mess with me. Suddenly, desire flared within me, a feeling I haven't experienced in a long time. Simply put, I wanted intimacy. I looked at my husband sitting on the opposite end of the sofa. He put on his smart glasses and was focused on the screen in front of him. The white t-shirt with the red sauce stain above the Nike logo is left over from the spaghetti we ate earlier. Unshaven, with an unkempt beard that looked like a disheveled nest. He certainly wasn't the epitome of temptation. But it was my husband and my desire was so strong. He had exactly what I needed. "Tom, we should get ready for bed," I purred, gently stroking his arm. It may not have been the most masterful seduction, but there was definitely a romantic note in my words. Perhaps a little cryptic, but any attentive man would have taken the hint. Tom didn't react, didn't look away from his laptop. "Tom, can you hear me?" He looked at me for a moment to show me that he had heard, and then turned his attention back to the screen. "Yes, dear. You said you were going to bed. I'll try to be quiet when I come so I don't wake you." "How can you be so stupid?" "Volume." He finally looked up and looked at me a little longer. Something flashed across his face, as if a light bulb had suddenly turned on. I sat there, ready for him to pick me up and carry me into the bedroom. "Sorry, honey. Good night." He leaned over, kissed me on the cheek, and immediately went back to his laptop. I was seething with anger. I was sitting in front of him, literally throwing myself at him, and he just sits with this laptop of his. Should I sit on top of him? Even then, he probably would have asked me to move back a little so he could see the screen better. Burning with resentment, I got up and went upstairs. He barely noticed my absence. I climbed into bed and quickly pulled the blanket over myself. The more I thought about it, the more my anger flared. I lay there with my body burning with desire and feeling the tension. I definitely didn't want to sleep. After a couple of hours, my husband finally climbed into bed. Yes, I was still not in the mood to fall asleep. I felt the mattress dip under his weight as he lay down. He tossed and turned for a couple of minutes, trying to get comfortable. "Kara, let's get on with it." Oh, now he has a desire. Did he really say that? Let's get on with it. Was this supposed to turn me on? No romance, no hints, no charm. I didn't even shave. He just fell into bed and suggested getting on with it. I pulled away. "Tom, I'm tired. I need to get up early." He exhaled in irritation and rolled over onto his back. I felt his disappointment, partly because I experienced the same thing myself. Why did I push him away, although just a couple of hours ago I dreamed of him having sex with me? I think it was punishment for not paying attention to me earlier. Was it unfair? Maybe. More precisely, definitely. But I hinted to him, and he simply did not pay attention. I wanted him to pounce on me, to be consumed by desire. But he couldn't look up from his work to notice it. We rarely get the opportunity for moments like this. When the time finally comes when I really want intimacy, he doesn't see it. And then 2 hours later, he comes upstairs and says, "Let's do this." No, really. We both lay in bed in silent disappointment until we finally fell asleep. Tom, a month later. I shifted in my uncomfortable chair and nervously adjusted my tie. My armpits seemed to be wet with sweat, and beads of moisture appeared on my forehead. Is it getting hot in here? The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds, and the silence that surrounded them intensified the sound. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Mr. Winchester, we apologize for the wait. Mr. Danvers is on a conference call that lasts longer than expected. He should finish soon. Do you need anything while you wait? Maybe water or coffee. We also have soda if you want. No, it's okay. Thanks a lot. The attractive secretary smiled, nodded, and returned to her desk. A moment after she sat down, her fingers started tapping on the keyboard again, as if I wasn't there. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The clock on the wall continued to count down the seconds. Finally, after another 10 agonizingly long minutes, I was approached by a man whom I assumed to be Mr. Danvers. He extended his hand, and I stood up, shaking it firmly. "Mr. Winchester, sorry to keep you waiting." "It's okay, Mr. Danvers. It's hard to believe that I've been waiting for 45 minutes already." "Time flew by," I lied. I would tell him he looks like Tom Cruise just to get the job. Over the next hour, he bombarded me with questions. Most of the time, I had good answers. I tried to highlight my experience and achievements in my previous job. He seemed really impressed. Although all employers usually looked the same until they sent a letter that they had chosen a different candidate, I drove home with hope and doubt. I must admit that the constant refusals began to affect my self-esteem. I worked at my previous job for so long that I knew it like the back of my hand. The people who worked under me respected me as a leader. Management trusted my work ethic. I was the golden boy and Mr. Solver. Now I had to start building my reputation again, which was painful. But to do this, I first had to find a job. Someone had to take a chance and take me. As I drove home, my thoughts kept returning to the events of the last few weeks and how my relationship with Kara had developed. From the moment our son Dean openly pointed out to me that Kara and I had serious problems, I began to make efforts to change the situation and bring warmth and understanding back into our relationship. I understood that my anger and irritation, which spilled out on Kara, was destroying our marriage, and I decided to stop while there was still time. I tried to be more attentive and affectionate, learned to control myself and speak to her more softly, choosing words that conveyed love and kindness rather than irritation or fatigue. Every day I approached her, asked how her day went, trying not just to ask a question for appearances, but to truly, sincerely listen to her, delve into her experiences and concerns. I wanted to show her that she was not alone, that I was there, that I heard her and appreciated everything she did. I even tried to add a touch of romance, flirting with her again and hinting that we could have our own adult time to rediscover the closeness that once connected us. But her reactions disappointed me more and more every day. Her answers were cold, indifferent, almost mechanical. Sometimes she would simply nod or say a few phrases without showing the slightest interest in the conversation. There was no previous sparkle in her eyes. Her voice sounded lifeless, as if there was not a drop of joy or desire left in it to get closer again. I was losing her. This was noticeable in her gaze when she returned from work. There was no love or gratitude in her eyes, only emptiness. A ringing phone interrupted my thoughts. A number appeared on the screen that was vaguely familiar to me. "Hello, this is Tom." Hello, Mr. Winchester. This is Patty, a secretary from the company where you just interviewed. Mr. Danvers told me to call you while you're still around. He really enjoyed your interview and wants to offer you the job right away. Can you go back to the office? The last hour or so was like a dream come true. Okay, maybe my dreams aren't that big. Find a job, pay the bills, making love to your wife. But after wandering through a dark void for a year, it was nice to finally see a glimmer of light. New job, damn, how nice it is to say these words. Even the very realization that I was now in business again brought back a feeling of stability and confidence in the future. Of course, the pay at this place did not reach the level of my previous job, where I managed to climb the career ladder and over time received generous rewards for my work. There my salary was even slightly inflated, which in the past seemed to go without saying. But having lost this place, I mistakenly believed that I could immediately find something at the same level. My high expectations prevented me from accepting reality. I continued to look for offers with similar pay, wasted time on choosing jobs that seemed insufficiently prestigious to me, and thereby missed out on real opportunities. Finally, I realized that I needed to change my approach. I stopped weeding out jobs that didn't fully meet my standards, and that turned out to be a key decision. By becoming more flexible, I expanded my options and allowed myself to look for positions that, while not at the highest level, offered stability and perspective. Thanks to this approach, my chances of finding a job have increased significantly, and this has led me to today's small, but such an important victory. Sitting in the car after the interview where I was officially accepted, I felt a huge weight of responsibility and stress slowly fall off my shoulders. It's funny how everything can change in one day. Just yesterday morning, I was sitting at home all alone, eating cereal in the kitchen in my underpants, while Kara got ready for her job and I felt useless. And today I'm shaved in a suit and tie, with a new pass and fully employed. On the way home, I took my phone out of my pocket and scrolled through my contacts list. When I saw Kara's name, I had the urge to call her, but I quickly dismissed this thought. She was at work, and I didn't really want to talk to her. I could tell her in the evening when she would return. Instead, I called my mom. "Hi, Tom. So, did you get the job?" Her voice sounded in the earphone on the second ring, full of hope and delight. "Actually, yes, Mom." "Ah, yes, I knew this would be it. I prayed for you last night, and the Lord told me this is exactly the case." I laughed quietly. All I could do was smile and let my mother believe that she was praying for my luck. I smiled to myself. My mother always included the Holy Trinity in my job search. She knew that I didn't really believe in this whole church thing, but she still inserted her prayers into every conversation. Well, if it makes her feel better, then so be it. I resisted the urge to remind her that she prayed before each of my interviews. The Lord prompted her that every time it was the one. And this went on for a whole year. The same God who gave me this job failed every other job I applied for. But in general, I was too happy to argue with her about trifles. The main thing is that now I finally have a job. And what did Kara say? She must be over the moon. Um, I haven't told Kara yet. I think I'll tell her in the evening when she gets home. There was a short pause at the other end of the line. I was about to think that the connection had been lost when I heard her voice again. "So you haven't told her you got the job yet?" "Well, don't wait until evening. She's probably already worried, wondering if you got it or not. She knows that your interview is already over." To be honest, I didn't mention the interview to her. They just called me yesterday afternoon to invite me for an interview today. In the evening, this was somehow not discussed. I didn't bring it into the conversation because I didn't want to have to explain again why I wasn't hired for another job. The look of disappointment in her eyes after each refusal made me doubt whether I should tell her about this chance. "Hey, Mom, I need to run. I love you, we'll talk later," I said, interrupting her last words. Fortunately, it was easy to distract my mother. Just change the subject. "Bye, Tom. I love you too. Kiss Sam for me." With these words, she hung up. I spent the rest of the way home a little irritated. Firstly, I realized that something was wrong in my relationship with my wife, since I didn't even want to tell her about today's interview. Secondly, I was always angry when Mom left Dean behind. Instead of kiss the boys, she only talked about Sam. Yes, I understand that Sam is her biological grandson, but Dean was as much a son to me as Sam, so Dean is also her grandson. We discussed this with her more than once, but she continued to behave this way. Was it so difficult to acknowledge him? Since the thought of this could not leave my head, I decided to call Kara and tell her about today's event. If she answers, I'll tell her everything. If not, I'll wait until evening. Let fate decide. Listening to her voicemail, I nodded and hung up. So, until the evening. Tiara, same day. I was sitting in a meeting taking notes when I saw a notification flash on my phone screen. Thank God I turned off the sound beforehand. A quick glance at the screen showed that my husband was calling me. I hung up the call and sent it to voicemail. I listened for another minute to see if the message had arrived, in case he left something. But having not heard the notification, I decided that it was not too important. I'll call you back after the meeting or at home. Anyway, I turned my attention back to my boss, who continued talking. This was no ordinary meeting. No, this is a meeting with the company's top managers. They discussed the numbers and tried to decide how many people needed to be fired to achieve the desired profit. Over the past 2 years, sales had declined and they were panicking. The numbers my boss quoted seemed excessive to me, but I'm just a secretary, so no one was interested in my opinion. You'd think I was worried about my job. In fact, I was probably in the safest position in the company. Considering that my boss was deathly afraid of firing me and opening the way for a possible leak, I felt quite calm. After that day in his office, he hardly spoke to me. He gave instructions and everything related to work, but his tone was harsh and dry. He even stopped stirring up rumors. Moreover, he seemed to be trying to suppress them. However, I was worried about those who work in other departments of the company. I knew how being fired could destroy a family. People in such situations are forced to do things they would never do under other circumstances. Horrible, humiliating things. So, gentlemen, these are our numbers. It's not great, but sometimes you have to cut the fat, Mr. Worthy said, summing up a long presentation. Muffled conversations were heard in the hall as those present began to discuss what had been said. But something clicked in my head. I don't know what it was, but looking at the table on the screen, I suddenly noticed obvious points. I don't know if I was going to say this out loud, but I heard my voice say, "Why are there so many people on the night shift?" The whole hall fell silent, and all the men stared at me in surprise, as if a talking monkey had suddenly started speaking in complete sentences. "Sorry, what did you say, young lady?" The marketing manager looked at me and nodded, urging me to continue. The others looked at me as if they still could not understand how this monkey spoke. Since I started, I decided to continue. I just wanted to know why there are so many employees on the night shift. It seems the main problem with sales is that there aren't enough people to stock the merchandise during the day. I just thought that maybe some of the night shift staff could be transferred to the day. This would help put more goods on the shelves, and then people would buy more. Instead of laying people off, you could simply redeploy them to increase sales. Well, that's it, my thoughts. My voice wavered as I began to lose confidence in what I was saying. The looks I received were not particularly encouraging, especially the look from my boss. He looked at me as if he wanted to wrap his thick fingers around my neck and squeeze. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mueller. I apologize for my secretary's behavior. Sometimes her tongue gets ahead of itself," Mr. Worthy said, giving me a withering look. To my surprise, the marketing manager looked at me with interest and smiled. "What's your name, miss?" Winchester. Kara Winchester." A brief expression of recognition flashed across his face. Then he nodded, as if mentally storing the name in his memory. "Yes, so, Miss Winchester. Funny you should say that. I was just thinking about exactly the same thing. These numbers do seem a bit high. I figured that instead of making cuts, We could find a way to increase sales. Your proposal is of interest." The expression of contempt that surrounded me 5 minutes ago was replaced by approving nods. Except for my boss, he glared at me. "James, is this your secretary?" Mr. Mueller asked, turning to Mr. Worthy. My boss nodded silently. "Well, she's clearly wasting her talent on you." Mr. Mueller jokes. The whole room burst into laughter. Even Mr. Worthy had to put on a fake smile. That's the difficulty for powerful people. There is always someone who has more power and whose jokes must be tolerated. "Great point, Kara. Perhaps I can lure you away from this man." He winked at me, indicating that it was a joke, but there was some interest in his voice. I felt it, and my boss seemed to notice this too, which he clearly didn't like. The meeting soon ended. There were a few more mutual compliments and exchanges of pleasantries, but soon everyone went about their business. Everyone except Mr. Mueller. He was delayed. I decided to focus on my tasks and plunged back into work. I don't know how much time passed, but suddenly I noticed Mr. Mueller standing next to my desk. "Is there anything I can help you with?" I asked, looking at him with curiosity. "Certainly. Are you hungry? Do you prefer Thai cuisine or Italian?" "What?" I was surprised. "I wanted to know where to take you for lunch." There was no hint of command or request in his voice. It was a given that was not worth arguing about. Mr. Mueller, I have a lot of work to do." He shook his head as if it didn't matter. "You can finish after lunch. So, Thai or Italian?" I thought for a moment about how to politely get out of this situation. Softening my voice, I said, "I'm sorry, but I have to refuse." He looked a little puzzled, but quickly shrugged it off and smiled. "Look, I'm not trying to confuse you, in case that's what you're thinking. I just want to have lunch with you and talk." "Why do you need to talk to me? I'm just a secretary. I have no knowledge that could be useful to you." He laughed and looked at me with a knowing smile. "First of all, we both know that this is not true. You can be anyone, but not an ordinary secretary. Secondly, you must be at least a little curious as to why I waited 2 hours to get your attention and invite you to lunch." "I'm married," I said as a final argument. I didn't even know why I said that. I was a little confused and caught off guard. For some reason, this was the first thing that came to mind. "And I'm married. But luckily my wife allows me to eat when I'm hungry. Does your husband allow you to eat, or does he keep you on some kind of strict diet?" He smiled and chuckled slightly as my mind tried to keep up with his words. There was business correctness in his tone, but at the same time a slight flirtation. "It was like playing tennis," he served. I returned. He responded with a slice shot, and I rushed at the ball to intercept it. Besides, his look was special. He didn't just look at me, but seemed to study me, assessing my reaction to his presence, as if he was conducting a behavioral experiment. It was a little scary. I had to carefully consider every word and action. "You don't get rejected often, do you?" He walked over to the coat rack in the corner of the office. "Of course not. Everyone loves Italian food. Is this your coat?" he asked, taking my coat from the hanger. The question was rather rhetorical, since this was the only woman's coat on the hanger. I smiled and got up from my seat. He helped me put on my coat and then opened the door for me. "Greek salad, is that all you're going to eat? I took you to the best Italian restaurant in town, paid for lunch, and you only chose a salad for $6. Maybe you're on some crazy diet after all." "Why is everyone so interested in what I eat?" "I don't eat salad because I'm dieting. I just like salad," I said without a hint of amusement in my voice. I felt quite comfortable with Mr. Mueller. We had a casual conversation while we waited for our food. I found out that he is married and has 3 children. His oldest son recently enrolled in officer training school in Indianapolis and is studying logistics for the Navy. I told him about my family, although of course I kept silent about the fact that I worked as a dancer in my life. The whole conversation flowed easily. He had a good sense of humor, but he didn't seem like a clown. He was an educated man, but he did not try to appear smarter by using pompous words. Plus, he actually listened when I spoke. After a while, I had to pull myself together a little. It was easy to lose yourself in his company and remember that there was a reason for this dinner after all. So, Mr. Mueller. Richard, he interrupted me. I asked you to call me Richard. I nodded and conceded. Okay, Richard, as nice as this interaction was, you invited me here for a reason. He smiled and wiped his mouth with the napkin in front of him. Taking a sip of wine, he looked me straight in the eyes. Yes, I invited you. These words hung in the air until he picked up the dessert menu and glanced over it. I was confused again and didn't know how to behave with him further. It was almost impossible to understand his intentions. I love cheesecake. I think I'll take a piece. What about you, Mr. Mueller? Richard, he corrected me and called the waiter over. He ordered 2 cheesecakes, one obviously for me. When the waiter left, Richard turned to me. Tell me, Kara, do you enjoy working for James? I had a hard time suppressing the urge to respond with something like, God, no. Richard's gaze was intensely searching as I searched for a tactful answer. I had a feeling that he already knew the answer to this question, so I decided to be straightforward. No, I don't like working for James at all. However, we have some understanding that makes our communication tolerable. He nodded and took another sip of wine, and then he asked a question that almost stopped my heart. Is this understanding of yours related to the rumors that I heard? Crap, where is he going? Rumors? Yes, rumors about how he treats women, about how he makes them feel obligated to serve him. For example, I heard that you quit but came back the next day. Did he demand something from you to change your mind? I understood that my face betrayed an attempt to maintain indifference. It is almost impossible to hide such panic. Unless you're a professional CIA agent, he didn't even expect confirmation or denial from me. That's what I thought. I wanted to run out of the restaurant and throw myself under the nearest car. Suddenly, my safe and secure position didn't seem so secure at all. I imagined my family being in need again, but this time with no way to fix the situation. Richard must have noticed my emotions and tried to calm me down with a smile. Don't worry, Kara, I'm not going to set you up. Actually, I was hoping you could help me. At that moment, the waiter returned and placed 2 cheesecakes in front of us. My suspicions were confirmed. There was indeed one for me. The waiter nodded, giving us privacy. Why do you need my help? I asked. My voice sounded weak. To be honest, I was scared. Richard was difficult to understand, and I didn't know what to expect from him. Let me tell you a story, Kara. I think then a lot will become clear. He told me a story about his best friend's wife. The woman's husband, Richard's best friend, had cancer and was fighting for his life. Medical bills began to mount, not to mention the daily expenses of running a household. She urgently needed to find a job. Luckily, her husband's best friend was an influential person in the company. Richard wanted to help his friend and his family, so he put in a good word for her. To avoid accusations of bias, he placed her in a different department of the company where they worked. She was offered a job as a secretary, and James Worthy became her boss. In addition, Richard paid for her husband's treatment. She was very grateful to him. She worked hard for the company for 2 years until one day she unexpectedly quit. No one knew why she left so suddenly. It remained a mystery until about 6 months later, when a young woman contacted her and began asking questions about the reasons for her leaving. At first, the woman was wary, but soon realized why she was being asked. It turned out that he and this woman, who, you guessed it, was me, had a common problem. Both of them found themselves in a situation where their vulnerability was taken advantage of. Both women found themselves in a vulnerable position and received an offer to settle the situation from Mr. Worthy. The only difference is that one of them was forced to settle it for a whole year until she couldn't stand it and quit. She could not tell anyone the reason for her leaving, fearing that her husband would find out. She didn't want to cause him more pain, so she carried the burden alone. When I, the same woman with whom she had a common history, called her, She could no longer hide, and she told Richard everything. You see, Kara, I want to bring this scoundrel to clean water. I want to remove it, but I can't use Jane, a friend's wife, because she refuses to testify. She's afraid it will kill John. Do you want to use me? My marriage is no less important than your friend's marriage. It will have the same devastating consequences for me. Right, so I don't want to reveal this particular truth in order to get rid of him. I'm sure this bastard has a few more skeletons in his closet. Of course, this is just a guess, but I am convinced that his penchant for harassment is far from his only sin. So why don't you find out on your own and get rid of him? I asked. His answering grin seemed conspiratorial to me. I would love to, Kara, but I can't find incriminating evidence on him without being noticed. I need someone inside the company with whom he has a tense relationship, a person like you, to help me. Together, we could get rid of the common enemy. Now, the reason for our lunch became clear to me. That's why you waited for me. You recognized my name as the person who called your friend. Bingo. And what exactly do you want me to do? My plan is simple. You don't quit or allow yourself to be fired and then find dirt on him for me. And I'll start hunting rabbits. Bunny hunting? Seriously? Well, Mr. Fudd, if I agreed to help you hypothetically, of course, what would I get in return? Well, first of all, you would take revenge on the scoundrel who used you. Secondly, I will personally make sure that you have a new boss, less inclined to use you in this way. Is it true? And how can you guarantee that he won't take advantage of me? I've heard similar promises from men before. Well, let's just say that the person I have in mind will only value your work and your professionalism. Never, I repeat, will he never look at you the way James did, either in his professional or personal life, he said, winking at me. I couldn't help but smile wickedly. I felt like Olivia Pope again. Don't you dare contact me, you will regret it. I understand, Richard. You're lucky you found the right woman. We raised our glasses, sealing our union. At that moment, a connection was established between us, and a partnership arose. And when I looked into his eyes, it was as if a spark ignited in my stomach. Something primitive, something that drew me to him. I felt alive. To be continued. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. She will be there very soon. The link to the sequel will be in the description of this video below. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.